So, I think I have to tell you a secret. Mr. Gary Merasty is younger than me, and he has his own Wikipedia page. I thought that was for people who lived like a long time ago, but I was wrong. I realized it's actually for people who have truly made an impact. So Gary Merasty is a former two-time Grand Chief of the Prince Albert Grand Council and a member of the Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation located in Treaty 6 territory. He is the first statist First Nations person to be elected in Saskatchewan. In the early 2000s, he served as a member of Parliament for Desnethe, Missinippi, Churchill River in northern Saskatchewan. And he is an undergraduate and a graduate in education from the University of Saskatchewan. To say something about his unfailing commitments to both Indigenous and settler people in Canada, Gary introduced the motion for the federal government to offer a formal apology to survivors of the Canadian residential school system. This motion was worked on 3 different times, but finally received unanimous all-party support in the House of Commons. Can you imagine that today? Anyway, his efforts led to the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and a deep reckoning by settler Canadians about the harms of past and present colonization throughout society and the steps we might all take to become partners in reconciliation. Gary has also served on countless boards providing both education and economic development opportunities for Indigenous people in Saskatchewan and Canada. For his outstanding service to the people of Canada, Gary's received both the Queen Elizabeth II Golden Jubilee Medal in 2004, and for his service to the people of Saskatchewan, the Commemorative Medal for the Centennial of Saskatchewan in 2005. And he's been working ever since. Since being a federal politician, he's served with several private companies, always seeking opportunities for reconciliation through fair and sustainable economic development and through education. Presently, Gary serves as the CEO of the Peter Ballantyne Group of Companies and as Senior Advisor, Indigenous and External Relations for the School of Environment and Sustainability at the University of Saskatchewan. We are honored to welcome Gary Merasty to our event today. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jean, for the comments just now. Learned a lot even through that, getting more background. Thank you, Elder Harvey, for your opening prayer this morning. And he mentioned his brother, Victor. Victor and I were very good friends. We went to university together years ago. And sorry, I got to put this on here properly while I'm talking. And he was an amazing individual, you know, as Harvey shared. So, but with that, excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And actually look forward to learning from all of you later on this morning. As we kind of go through the table. I'm turning on my timer here because I'm a recovering politician. I think I'm on step 9 of the 12-step program, so this may take a little longer. But with that, yeah, no, big thank you to everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I acknowledge the flags that are here with us, with the Métis Nation, Treaty 6 flag, the provincial Canadian, and the university flag. Acknowledge where we're at in this time and in this place, and yeah, looking forward to seeing what kind of damage I can do with you guys this morning. It's interesting because as I prepared for this, and I've kind of stepped away from public speaking and just kind of laid low the last few years, focusing on different things. COVID kind of did that to all of us, but I kind of ran into some blocks, and I couldn't, for the life of me, envision how to approach this subject. It's usually I'm very visual, and I start with a chart. I usually have slides, but usually in sessions like this, I always worry about the technology. So I thought, okay, this time I'm not going to do slides, but very visual. And I usually start with a circle in the middle, then I branch out, and I usually just then wing it after that and speak. And very rarely do I have an actual thing that I've written. So I'm actually nervous because I suck at reading stuff, right? So, but I did run into a bit of a brick wall. I was thinking, like, well, how hard could this be? You know, kind of belittling myself, but we're just talking about the SDGs, ESG frameworks, the economy, business, science, innovation, technology, public policy, it's all easy topics that, especially when you can all kind of lump them together. So I was a little intimidated, to say the least, but in having a conversation with Maureen, with Greg, you know, as we were talking about this, you know, is focus on Saskatchewan, focus on the North, focus on Indigenous. We really like to see, you know, what your thoughts are in that space. And so after sitting down unsuccessfully a couple times, trying to craft something, got up and walked away and started thinking in Cree to myself, SDGs like just asking question like, how do they see SDGs in the future? How has it evolved from the past? Where are we at today? How do they see us within that? And I think through, you know, walking around, doing some other stuff around the house and talking Cree, you know, reflecting a bit on my career as well, education, public service, politics, business, all of which had elements of global and local within them. Then I started to focus a bit more on northern Saskatchewan, our Indigenous communities, all communities, the North. And I think through the process of thinking out loud in my head, maybe even talking, my wife was probably wondering, why are you walking around talking in Cree in the house by yourself? But through the process of thinking in Cree, thinking about place, I think a few thoughts started to emerge for me. So first, and I think backed by reality, is the fact I take a bit more of a pragmatic view of these things, but from an Indigenous perspective, failure in achieving these goals is life and death. I am not even exaggerating. People are dying in our communities every day. They died yesterday, dying today, and they're dying tomorrow. A failure to achieve these types of goals that have been set out are literally life and death for us. And sometimes perhaps we don't think about that, but it certainly is true from where I was raised, nurtured, and shaped in these communities. So looking back, and I go back to my just growing up and stuff, you know, we've been trying to advance common sense solutions to address a lot of the issues and challenges in our communities for decades. We've battled apathy, partisanship, ignorance, systemic racism, and others talked about solutions about our backyard without really involving us, right? So why do I say all this? So it's life and death because today, right now, we're seeing forest fires ravage the northern Canada. I just started reading, I don't know if you guys have started to read, I just started reading, I haven't finished it, but it's scary. John Vallant's book, Fire Weather. Interesting, it talks about forest fires. And I was 15 years old when I first went forest firefighting. They thought I was 16, I didn't correct them because I wanted to make some money. But I was scared the minute that plane landed on the Churchill River and the forest fire's right there and you could feel the heat, and they said, get out, and you got your water pack and your clothes and you're wet because you're jumping in the river and right away you're fighting fire. The intensity of the fires today, the fire tornadoes he talks about, the heat, is just unbelievable. The peat moss as it dries, fires are staying for months after the surface fire has been out, right? Firefighters are on the front lines every day risking their lives. Evacuations are common in our communities. The disruption and the trauma of that to families, the disconnection and interruption of education and health services are real. And just a quick forest fire. I know I have limited time, but one time we were out firefighting, and my fire boss was my uncle who had raised me. And he said, okay, in Cree, drop the hoses and run. So I kind of, I'm just kind of going like this. I'm 15 years old. My uncle, who's 60, is lapped me, and he's hurdling fallen trees. And I thought, oh my God, this must be serious. So I had to pick up my pace to keep up with him. But it's real. The danger is real when you're forest firefighting. And one other, because of the intense heat, we evacuated our community in 1980. And we were standing on a ridge because we couldn't do anything about the fire. And we saw it coming into view, and we were up high on a ridge. The fire preheated the trees in front of it. It rose up to the top, the treetops, and it rolled like 30 kilometers an hour, just going from west to east or east to west. It's unbelievable, the power, right? So community evacuations all too common. Floods are displacing our communities across the country. Droughts, low water levels impact water access, water quality, mobility of our people on their waterways, and impacts local economic pursuits. Energy access is tenuous for us in the north. The northern grid's not grounded. Access to I just realized the other day, I was talking to people from back home, they can't even get propane to enjoy a barbecue. They have to go from Pelican, for example, to PA to get propane. So to have a barbecue, you have to plan what we take for granted here. So access to even basic energy for quality of life, enjoyment, sitting on your deck is an everyday challenge. Food security is a constant challenge for us with inflation, prices, freshness, quality, variety, access to grocery stores. Unfortunately, kids do go to sleep hungry in many cases. Extreme weather events such as plow winds and tornadoes becoming all too common in the north, and they're moving even further north. The heat dome in BC killed 600 people. Think about our communities in the north, inadequate housing, not properly insulated, an unstable energy grid, and the heat dome come in, no cooling capacity for our houses. It's only a matter of time before, we kind of see what happened in BC and some of our northern communities. Hunting, fishing, harvesting are all, on the verge of extinction potentially because the land is changing so drastically. Of course, road access, connectivity are all challenges. Listen, I haven't even talked about, and I didn't mean to get all real, I haven't talked about poverty, mental health crisis, inadequate housing, which are persistent challenges as well. Now, unfortunately, and this is where we get to some of the meat in the sandwich here, is that these conditions are made worse by various other factors. Northern alienation. It's real, right? Provincial norths in Canada are in a constant political limbo. They're the first to get funding cuts. They're considered later in the process to receive any benefits, typically an afterthought, and the debates between the feds and the province about who's responsible for northern infrastructure and so on and so forth. And these are real challenges across Canada's norths, right? Most of the populations in Canada live within an hour or so of the US borders, and they benefit from the bounty of the north, but very little is reinvested back north. If there's real and tangible impacts and progress with SDG goals, it's probably those Canadians living closest to the US border that feel it. We don't. Even Saskatchewan, be tough for us to argue we feel the progress. There's obviously some, but the further north you go, you're removed. But yet we're the first to feel it. And we were having breakfast this morning, and we're talking about, yeah, we feel it, we see it every day, right? So northern alienation is real. 2, Indigenous peoples, northern peoples generally confronted with a unique public policy challenge comprised of 3 things. Geographic marginalization, small population over a wide geographic area. 2, demographic conflict. Average age of our people are under the age of 22. Canadians are over the age of 45. So knee and hip replacements in the majority is more of a topic than early childhood health, just to give an example. So I have this conflicting public policy issues, right? And I've been in a room as a politician with bureaucrats and other politicians say, well, It's too expensive, and it makes sense. Too expensive to build that infrastructure, education, and this and that and the other thing, housing, all this in the north for such a small population. It's true. It's not cheap. It's real. And also, we have this demographic challenge. And who do you vote for? By the way, like if you voted the right, maybe you'd get, so sometimes you can get pretty basic, pretty grinding, those conversations. And then you add to the public policy challenge, if you have the geographic marginalization, the demographic, then you have the jurisdictional chaos. Who's responsible for First Nation Métis issues? What's the degree of separation and responsibility for the feds and the province, right? It's like a hot potato or a game of cornhole. You're trying to get that bag in the hole and it disappears and out of sight, out of mind, or a hot potato throwing it around. So the jurisdictional chaos is real, so that's the big second. So you have northern alienation, this unique public policy challenge. And then 3, which is extremely troubling and scary right now, is our global society is more polarized than ever, in all likelihood, right? So it's really quite sad. It's so divisive and polarized on a daily basis. I don't know if you guys subscribe to the Edelman Trust Barometer that talks about trust levels in Canada, the US, and different countries. And scary, really scary what's going on. So, and as Indigenous peoples, unfortunately, we're often the targets of that polarized rhetoric centered around race, ignorance, gaslighting of micro-macro aggressions. Just look at the recommendations in missing and murdered Indigenous women, the TRC recommendations, Colton Bushy, what happened in Saskatchewan. So these are real, and if it's getting worse, I'm really worried about that, right? If it wasn't already bad, and it's getting worse. So polarization has this ability to make all of those things I talked about previously even worse and tough. So you have this unique convergence of northern alienation, western alienation, and polarization, Indigenous alienation, coming together to make it tough for us who are living every day. So I paint a bit of that because it really is life and death, right? And these objectives and these goals are so critical to achieve and move forward on. And solutions exist, but the economic realities can be difficult to overcome, and political will is sometimes lacking or not necessarily smart. I remember when the SDG goals came about, pre-2015, and I thought at the time that the strategy kind of was holistic in its approach, circular in the recommendation, kind of reflective of Indigenous and tribal world views, and I thought they were thoughtful, comprehensive, and probably achievable. Over the years, as I did work around sustainable development reporting with various companies utilizing various ESG frameworks, I became a little concerned. I was observing a clear disconnect between the SDG goals, ESG reporting frameworks, and business in general. Not to be cynical, but I felt a bit like the pursuit of SDG and ESG goals were too checkbox driven. We were chasing scores, right? And the framing of ESG strategies were, how can we get the highest score with the least amount of investment? And we were kind of driven in 2 ways. Maybe consultants would come to us and say, if you pay us, we'll help you get a higher score, which kind of can be demotivating, right? I'm being a little harsh, right? But also the low cost and lowest hanging fruit trend kind of took hold for the first number of years or decade as we achieved these goals. So obviously, these had an impact on the sustainability and the ability to transform society. But we did see some immediate goals, and they were exciting for the first number of years, right? We've seen the May 2023 SDG report card. We were a little concerned of the progress, but man, we were humming along the first number of years. But the rubber started to hit the road once more costly measures hit the boardroom tables and cabinet tables. And so it became tougher. Progress slowed if it didn't stall completely. And I'm not sure if these successes have reached the north, as I've mentioned earlier, but if there are any clear, measurable achievement and progress towards these goals, They're usually probably in Toronto or Vancouver, unfortunately. So maybe a part of this is because the SDGs, as I mentioned before, I thought holistic, circular, and I think they are, represented a new paradigm thinking in the interplay between those goals and our traditional Western economy. I think Canadian views on business are deeply embedded around Western concepts of wealth and capitalism. And I work in that space, and so you see it, but it has some downfalls, right? It has some challenges. Concept of land is to be exploited, profit is king, accumulation of the wealth is key, concentration of that wealth is desired, wage labor is a commodity, supply and demand, and so on. So to achieve the SDG goals, it probably requires a deeper focus and a paradigm shift around how we transition our economy. I'm generalizing here a bit, but if you ask Indigenous people about what wealth and capitalism is about, I think the answer revolves around good health, well-being, connection to land and place. We love profits when we have businesses. I'm head of a big group of companies and that, right? But there's tweaks and there's a worldview change a bit that probably needs to happen. So, and I know a lot of bright minds in the world went into thinking about the transition from a high carbon to low carbon world. I'm sure those great minds also thought about how, quality of life can be aided by improvements to technology and innovation and rolling it out. I sit on the board of the IRPP, Institute of Research of Public Policy, and we met in Calgary the other day. And one of our talks is the post-election budget, or post-election in Alberta. And it was interesting because there's lessons learned for the coming Saskatchewan election in all likelihood, in that the election hardly talked about sustainability. It was about affordability. And this is what I talk about, the rubber hitting the road with this paradigm shift that's not keeping up to what we need to see happen. Now, it was interesting. I didn't realize, but the Alberta government, they need $77 a barrel oil to break even in their provincial budget. Oil's at 75, I think, right now. Previous government had $60 a barrel, and they were going on the decline and focusing. But a $1 change on a barrel of oil in Alberta is $633 million to the provincial coffers. So you have this dispute between the federal government and Alberta, and it's really hitting the road around budget time, right? And how do we get around that, and can we? And what would that look like? Because their comment was, we have the biggest rollout. I think there's experts in the room. Alberta has one of the biggest rollouts of solar in the country. But the impact of solar as an energy generator versus oil, so they're having some interesting conversations. So even though it wasn't top of mind during the election, affordability was, it's come roaring back because their budget, they could be in major trouble if the oil doesn't hit 77 a barrel and it drops, right? So big risks over there. Anyway, I digress for a bit. The question now is, how do we deal with this today? We're halfway through to 2020, and the report card says we've got some work to do. I think leading up to 2015, the world was such a different place, right? And it's a lot more turbulent within our society, our global society today. Pandemic futures, global conflicts, deglobalization of supply chains, domestication of those supply chains, polarization. And my timer just ran out at 20 minutes. So what do we do? And I don't think there's an easy answer. I certainly don't have it. There's way smarter people everywhere, but I think there's some clear questions. Do we keep the same approach and just double down? Has pointing the finger at the laggards and trying to embarrass them worked? And will that continue to work? Will keeping the same approach work in the context of fake news era? How will societal polarization impact the goals? when there's these other priorities emerging? How will global conflict affect our goals? Do we stay the course with no change and just kind of hope for the best? How does the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act impact Canada? That's, if you're unfamiliar, it's massive, right? I also sit on the board of Sustainable Development Technologies Canada. So trying to be putting Canada at the forefront of technology and innovation. And there's amazing work out there. It's just not commercialized and moving quicker. And this interplay between the economy and commercializing these technologies that can really have an impact on the goals is just not happening quick enough. So what needs to happen in that space? The interplay, yeah, I won't even say that because I just mentioned, but the interplay between, innovation, technology, and quality of life, just to give you one example. There is a technology out, and there's many, this is one small example, teleoptical. You can have somebody here sitting in Saskatoon doing a full-blown optical examination of a patient in Black Lake, highest resolution, where you can tell not only is their eyesight in trouble, but you can begin to pick up high blood pressure, diabetes, a whole range of health issues just through a really comprehensive optical exam. We can do that without flying them in, without spending a lot of resources, getting access to quality health care. But government policy will not pay for that service today, right? So rolling those out, those technologies faster is absolutely key. So as I wrap up here, I'm going to make a controversial statement. It's always bad to say that and flag it ahead of time, but this is something that was shared with me by somebody who's a huge SDG champion, ESG champion. Several of them, in fact, as am I. Despite what you may be hearing so far, just like I said, it's life and death, right? He said to me, or they said to me, does the pursuit of SDGs, but more specifically the pursuit of a low-carbon economy, do more to hurt Indigenous, lower-income, and northern populations today? And I was stumped. And then the conversation went on. Today, energy is costly due to being choked at the supply. It's too expensive to have islanded renewable energy systems in the north and invest in them. Transmission lines are super expensive. Inflation is rampant. Innovation is slow in rolling out. All this raises the cost of living for our people in our Indigenous communities and northern communities. It's perhaps accelerating poverty and impacting quality of life right now while we're struggling to achieve these goals. Now, I don't think we can roll back the energy transition, the technology and innovation work that's been done. If anything, it's telling us we need to act with more urgency, right? So I think some key observations from a non-expert is that the role of business in advancing these goals is more outside today than it ever was. I think collaboration is non-negotiable. Saskatchewan, the federal government, Alberta, need to focus on pragmatic solutions to these challenges. They're all right to a certain extent. They're all wrong to a certain extent. They need to get over it and talk more, collaborate more. I can tell you, below the political level, it's actually happening. There's a lot of innovative thinking, so it kind of excites me when you start to hear the actual behind the political rhetoric, some of the real work that's going on. So I think role of business is outside in the transition of the economy, accelerating the rollout of technology. Collaboration, like I said, is non-negotiable. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, it's really life and death for our communities, and not being involved and talking about solutions without us is extremely problematic, right? And I think that there are a lot of solutions coming from the north, from Indigenous people, from northern peoples, is extremely valuable, and they're there, but we do run up to some of these barriers that I talked about. So with that, thank you very much.